30-year-old Mary Cavanaugh, a Michigan state representative, was arrested on a DWI on February the 13th of 2021, only 6 days after a DUI forgiveness law she co-sponsored went into effect. The arresting officer's body cam footage showed Cavanaugh driving erratically in a vehicle with 2 flat tires. She was pulled over and asked how much she'd had to drink, but she seemed confused by the officer's questions and was unable to stand on one leg. Her blood alcohol level was 0.17, twice the legal limit. The law she'd introduced was enacted to expunge DUIs for first-time offenders, though the incident marked her second such arrest. Cavanaugh apologized for her behavior on social media, indicating she suffered from alcohol addiction. Number 9. Neville Smith. On April the 23rd of 2017, a New York police officer drove down the Wick Expressway while intoxicated, leading to the death of 22-year-old Vanessa Raghubar. 32-year-old Neville Smith was driving his personal vehicle, a Mercedes, when he rear-ended Raghubar's Honda. The latter's car spiraled out of control and crashed against a tree and a light pole. She was rushed to the hospital along with her 21-year-old sister Maria and 20-year-old Justin Hariharan, where she remained in critical condition. She would ultimately succumb to her injuries the following day. Maria and Hariharan were treated for their injuries, then released. Smith wasn't severely harmed in the crash and was arraigned from his hospital bed. He faced charges of vehicular manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. In January of 2018, he resigned from the NYPD. Smith pleaded guilty as part of a deal with the prosecution, and in a ruling that bewildered many, was sentenced to just 4 months in jail plus 500 hours of community service and alcohol counseling. Number 8. Charlotte Nichols, David Linden, and Drew Hendry. 3 elected members of British Parliament identified as Charlotte Nichols, David Linden, and Drew Hendry were at the center of a scandal on Armistice Day 2021 when they boarded a plane to Gibraltar while intoxicated. Linden and Hendry allegedly exhibited rude and belligerent behavior during the flight. Nichols, meanwhile, reportedly needed a wheelchair to disembark because of her intensely impaired state, though she claimed that her unsteadiness had been caused by her medication. According to eyewitnesses, all 3 of them had been drinking heavily on the night before the trip. Linden and Hendry, both part of the Scottish Nationalist Party, claimed the scandal was a bizarre smear campaign meant to divert attention from the Conservative Party's corruption scandal. Number 7. Lori Ann Hill. On the first day of the 2014 school year, 49-year-old Lori Ann Hill was found passed out on a desk with no pants on at the school where she taught in Wagoner, Oklahoma. Some of Hill's colleagues discovered her before any of the students did, at which point they immediately called 911. The teachers told the police that Hill smelled of alcohol and had stumbled into the wrong classroom. Since Hill was a new teacher, none of the staff knew who she was until law enforcement identified her. She was arrested on suspicion of public intoxication. The authorities were unable to charge her with a DUI as they could not be certain she drove to work in her impaired state. Number 6. Lourdes Hernandez. New Mexico police officer Lourdes Hernandez was arrested on September the 19th of 2020 for driving drunk in Las Cruces. Hernandez, who was 25 at the time, was pulled over after a state trooper caught her doing 73 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. When asked to take a breathalyzer test, she refused, which gave the trooper probable cause to arrest her. Hernandez was charged with speeding and driving while intoxicated. An additional count of negligent use of a deadly weapon was added because a gun was found in the car she was driving. She was placed on paid administrative leave pending further investigation. Number 5. Justin Augustine. A police officer from Piqua, Ohio by the name of Justin Augustine drunkenly crashed his patrol car into a parking lot's concrete barriers, damaging a flatbed semi on October the 27th of 2018. He was charged with improper handling of a firearm in a vehicle and operating a vehicle while impaired. To avoid a harsher punishment, he agreed to plead guilty to failure to maintain physical control of his vehicle as well as possession of a weapon while intoxicated. Presiding Judge Thomas Hanna sentenced Augustine to 180 days in jail. all but 3 of which were suspended, and to pay a $1,000 fine. In order to avoid having to serve the rest of his jail term, he was expected to complete an education program and undergo a mental health evaluation. Hannah also suspended Augustine's driving license for a period of 40 days. Number 4. Nate Mayer. A police officer from Aurora, Illinois was arrested on March the 26th of 2019 for driving under the influence and passing out in his patrol car while on duty. Authorities were alerted when a concerned motorist called 911 after seeing a man passed out in a running car. Officer Nate Mayer later admitted to internal affairs that he'd been drinking vodka during his shift. His blood alcohol level was determined to be 0.43, 5 times the legal limit. However, since the police department failed to properly treat the incident as a potential criminal act, the prosecution was prohibited from using his BAC evidence at trial because Mayer's co-workers didn't follow protocol during the preliminary stages of the investigation. The officer didn't receive a DUI or any other legal consequences for his actions. He was allowed to keep his job, but was demoted and temporarily suspended without pay. District Attorney George Brouchler told the press he wondered if the police would have acted this way had the person behind the wheel been a civilian. In a surprising twist of events, Mayer was promoted in January of 2023. Number 3. Monica Marie Jenkins. On March the 17th of 2014, Monica Marie Jenkins, a Los Angeles public defender, was arrested at the San Francisco International Airport for making a drunken scene and attacking police officers. 36-year-old Jenkins began screaming at an airline employee when she was told she was too intoxicated to board her flight to Los Angeles, threatening to sue everyone who tried to stop her from getting on the plane. The employee suggested she sober up and try to get on the next flight, but the woman refused to leave. When police arrived, Jenkins began singing out loud and kicking at the officers that tried to remove her from the area. After she was physically forced into a patrol car, she thanked the officers for saving her, then asked them to supply her with drugs. As she was being booked in jail, Jenkins continued her erratic behavior and attempted to bite an attending nurse. In January of 2016, because of a deadlocked jury, the public defender was acquitted of all the charges levied against her, which included assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and being drunk in public. Number 2. Brian M. Kolb. 67-year-old Brian M. Kolb, an assemblyman from Canandaigua, New York, who'd previously written a newspaper article about the dangers of drunk driving, was arrested on December the 31st of 2019 for operating a state-issued vehicle while intoxicated. Police arrived at the scene after being informed of a crash. Kolb had reportedly driven his GMC Acadia into a ditch only a few feet away from his house. After failing a sobriety test, the assemblyman was taken into custody. In the incident's wake, Kolb issued a public apology, calling his actions a lapse in judgment. He stepped down from office and didn't run for re-election. On November the 1st of 2021, Kolb pleaded guilty to driving while impaired, a reduced charge offered by the prosecution due to irregularities with his initial arrest. The officers in charge of administering Kolb's failed sobriety test reportedly didn't follow proper protocol. As part of the deal, Kolb avoided jail time but had his license suspended for 3 months and would have to pay multiple fines as well as complete a driver program. Before we queue up the final listing, be sure to stay tuned afterwards if you haven't seen our previous video on when visiting Las Vegas goes wrong, another place where alcohol often flows freely. Number 1. Rob Ford. On November the 15th of 2013, Toronto Mayor Rob Ford was stripped of most of his power after refusing to resign amid a series of highly publicized scandals. Toronto City Council transferred Ford's responsibilities to his deputy mayor, Norm Kelly, until the next election. On St. Patrick's Day 2012, Ford was seen visibly intoxicated at City Hall, having held a party in his office. In his drunken state, he swore at his attendants and even knocked over an employee. Later that same month, the mayor got drunk at the Garrison Ball and was asked to leave by a member of the city council named Paul Ainsley. Ford was accused by multiple sources of using illicit substances, which was further validated after videos of him slurring his words and acting heavily intoxicated surfaced online. The man even admitted to using drugs during an interview but denied being an addict. In spite of the rampant scandals, Ford refused to resign, although he did issue an apology for making mistakes. Even after being stripped of his power, Ford attempted to run for re-election in 2014. He eventually had to withdraw from the race due to health issues. It was revealed he suffered from liposarcoma, and though he managed to recover from the first tumor, he had a relapse and passed away on March the 22nd of 2016.
Number 8. The Circus Circus Casino Heist. In 1993, the Circus Circus Casino in Las Vegas was robbed of $2.95 million. Heather Tallchief and her accomplice, Roberto Solis, disappeared from the scene in an armored truck. Over 10 years later, in 2005, Tallchief turned herself in to the Las Vegas authorities. She was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months for her role in the robbery. Solis, a criminal with an extensive history in robbery, was never found, and none of the stolen money has ever been recovered. Number 7. Esmeralda Gonzalez. On May the 31st of 2019, Esmeralda Gonzalez, a Vegas glamour model, was reported missing by her family. Her remains were found 5 months later encased in a homemade concrete structure in the desert. 24-year-old Esmeralda was reported to have mental problems, and it's believed she'd mistakenly entered the home of her killers, thinking it was her own. She had recently stopped taking her medication, according to her brother, Christopher Prestopino, 45, and his girlfriend, 31-year-old Lisa Mort, were the occupants of the house. After coaxing her with illegal substances, they tied her to a bed, at which point Esmeralda began to experience a mental breakdown. She threatened to call the police on the deranged couple, which led to Prestopino strangling her to death. She was then injected with poisonous pool cleaner, which investigators believe had been a measure taken to ensure she was dead. Prestopino proceeded to dump Esmeralda's body in the Las Vegas desert, where he encased her with concrete. An investigation was opened into Esmeralda's disappearance, and a tip was given to the police by a friend of Prestopino's. The friend allegedly claimed that Prestopino had told him that he'd killed the missing girl. Prestopino was arrested along with his girlfriend, Mort. He was put on trial and originally faced charges of murder, first-degree kidnapping, and murder conspiracy. However, he was later committed to a mental psychiatry hospital after undergoing professional examination. Mort's charge was listed as conceal and aiding an offender. She later confessed guilty to accessory to murder. Number 6. Murder of Melissa James. In December of 2005, a motorist stumbled upon a Jaguar in the middle of the desert. It had been torched, and inside the trunk of the vehicle was the body of 28-year-old Melissa James. Melissa had moved to Vegas only 4 months earlier, having been coerced by her employer, Craig Titus. Craig and his wife, Kelly Ryan, were fitness industry superstars. Between them, they held multiple bodybuilding titles. Melissa had been employed by the couple as a live-in personal assistant, and although Craig and Kelly denied any involvement in her death, mounting evidence loomed against them. The autopsy revealed Melissa had been strangled, shot with a taser, and injected with a lethal dose of morphine prior to her death. Craig and Kelly were eventually arrested on suspicion of the murder, and in 2008, they pled guilty to it. They are currently serving their time in prisons in Nevada. Number 5. The murder of Tupac Shakur. Tupac Shakur was a 25-year-old hip-hop artist from the West Coast. He was murdered in Las Vegas on September the 7th of 1996 in what is thought to have been an organized hit. Tupac was a passenger in a car driven by Suge Knight, the founder of Death Row Records. While stopped at a red light, a white 4-door Cadillac appeared and drove up to his vehicle. Gunmen inside the Cadillac opened fire on Tupac, and he was hit by 4 bullets. 2 penetrated his chest, 1 went into his arm, and another into his thigh. Tupac was rushed to the hospital, having initially survived his injuries, but 6 days later died of cardiac arrest. To this day, the murder of Tupac Shakur remains unsolved, and this has prompted many theories from his devastated fans and the hip-hop community. Some of them propose the hit had been ordered by Suge Knight himself, rival music groups from the East Coast, or even that Tupac had staged his death and is in fact still alive. Number 4. Pipe bombing at the Luxor. The Luxor, a luxury hotel and casino in Vegas, was hit by a pipe bomb attack on May the 7th of 2007. The pipe bomb was sophisticated, having been disguised as a coffee cup. It was placed in the parking garage on top of 24-year-old Wilibaldo Antonio's car. Equipped with a motion trigger, as Antonio went to his vehicle, it blew up, killing him. The creator of the bomb had allegedly built it for his friend, who was jealous that Antonio was dating his former girlfriend. The two suspects were arrested and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Number 3. Arson at the Las Vegas Hilton. In 1981, a 23-year-old busboy at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas made headlines as he started a fire in the elevator lobby. Philip Klein, described as a troubled young man, was initially thought to have tried to put the fire out, but it was later determined he'd intentionally started the blaze. The fire spread through the hotel fast and trapped guests in their rooms. Over 200 people were injured and 8 people died. Klein was convicted of the 8 counts of murder and confessed to the arson in a jail interview. He said that he'd purposefully used the lighter to set fire to some curtains. Number 2. Tony Calio. One morning in December of 2010, Tony Calio, who'd become known as the Biker Bandit, set his sights on the Bellagio Hotel and Casino. 5 days prior, Tony had successfully robbed another casino, the Suncoast. He'd held up the poker room and had made it out with $19,000 in cash. It was his first casino robbery, and he intended to carry forward the momentum he had built. Wearing dark overalls, gloves, and a motorcycle helmet, Tony walked towards the Bellagio with a gun hidden in his right pocket. He casually exchanged waves with an elderly security guard as he walked through the entrance. Although the casino was quiet in the early hours, he knew his presence would quickly raise the alarm. Tony went straight for a high-limit craps table and pulled out his gun. In front of him lay chips worth millions of dollars. Tony threw handfuls of chips into a backpack as fast as he could before he fled from the casino to his motorcycle outside. Speeding away from the crime scene, Tony has successfully made off with $1.5 million in his backpack. Tony returned to the casino regularly to convert his stolen chips into cash he could use. Posing as a regular player, he would sneak the stolen chips into his stack at the games he joined. The first time he did this was the day after the robbery, and at one point he even joined the same craps table that he had robbed. He cashed out successfully multiple times. With his newfound fortune, Tony began to live the high life, indulging in everything Vegas had to offer. Meanwhile, detectives looking into the high-profile case were coming up with no leads. That was until Tony was flagged by the Bellagio's computer systems. Over $1 million of the chips Tony had stolen were $25 chips, known as cranberries due to their color. Players capable of holding these chips have a history of playing the highest of stakes at the casino, and the Bellagio have digital records of these high rollers. On these records, the name Tony Calio was nowhere to be found. This drew suspicions from the casino, and Tony's name was passed over to the police investigation. However, even with this information, the authorities still didn't have any evidence that Tony had committed the heist. That was until Tony's greed got the better of him. He had begun posting on a poker forum online in an attempt to find local players who would pay him smaller denomination chips for his cranberries. He provided one user of the forum proof that he held the cranberries he claimed to have, and out of pride, supplied evidence that he was the infamous Biker Bandit. The user forwarded this information to the authorities. Now, evidence was beginning to stack up against Tony. An undercover police officer working on the investigation soon befriended him, and the two worked out deals for Tony's chips. Then, one day after the cash had exchanged hands, the undercover officer walked off without a word. 6 police officers appeared, surprising Tony and giving him no opportunity for escape. They forced him to the ground and handcuffed him. Just 7 weeks after pulling off the heist, Tony was arrested and paraded out the doors of the Bellagio. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison for his crimes. He reportedly regrets not being able to pull the heist off just as much as he regrets committing it in the first place. Today's topic was requested by XTechnoXTV. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 1. Murder of Ted Binion. Ted Binion was a high-rolling gambling executive. His father, Benny Binion, was a casino business magnate and a well-known personality in Vegas. In 1998, Ted was found dead in his Las Vegas home. An autopsy revealed a cocktail of drugs, both prescription and illegal, in Ted's system. Initially thought to be an accidental suicide due to Ted's known addictions, detectives reclassified his death as homicide 6 months later, believing that it had been staged. In June of 1999, Ted's former girlfriend, along with her lover at the time, were arrested on suspicion of murder. The couple was also charged with robbery, grand larceny, and burglary, due to Ted's vault having been emptied. However, 4 years later, in 2003, their convictions were overturned by the Supreme Court. The court ruled that the judge had erred in his instructions to the jury during the couple's original trial. They were retried in 2004 when they were both acquitted of murder and instead were convicted on lesser charges. The couple has since been released from prison.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather be caught drinking on the job or stealing from your workplace? Let us know in the comments section below.